So in this chapter we're going to go over Maya's translation tools. To get started, let's create a box. Let's make it a little bit bigger, and let's give it some more subdivisions. There we go. Now if I hit the W key or come over here and click the move button, I can now move the box around the scene. Just like that, no problem. I can also click on a particular axis and constrain it to the X, Y, or Z axis. Or I can control click on an axis to exclude it and constrain the move to 2 of the axis, which is very useful. And let's do that one more time just to illustrate that point. And now let's go over rotation. And so if you hit E on your keyboard or come over here and click the rotate button, you'll see that we can rotate an object, and we can also constrain it very similar to how we were constraining objects with the move tool. Okay, undo that, and let's really quickly go over scaling. You can scale an object by hitting R on your keyboard or finding the scale button on the left hand side. Also, we can just go over to the channel box here and just start typing in numbers to get more precise scaling. Same thing for rotation. You can see I'm typing in 45 degrees for each axis. And translation. We'll translate this 16 units on the x-axis and -2 on the y. And then we can zero these out to put it back at the origin. Okay, so now I'm going to move the object a little bit. And let's also rotate it and scale it, just so that we cover all the transforms we can do. You can see them over here in the channel box. Now, if you want to freeze the transformations of an object, what you do is you go to the Modify button, and you click Freeze Transformations, and you can see in our channel box that everything now went to the defaults, which is nice if you'd like to freeze your transformations. But let's go ahead and undo that. And the next thing I want to show you is how to get into some more advanced move options. So if you hold down W, which is the move key, and then left click your mouse, you can see we have a lot more options in here for how to move an object. We can move it along an axis, we can also snap it to faces and verts. You can change your selection parameters for how you select an object. You can also use soft selection, which we'll go over later in this chapter. And you can tell your translation tools to be in world space or object space. So right now we're in world space, meaning that as I translate this object, you can see the axis stays relative to the world. Where if we switch to object space, now the axis has the same orientation as the object. Another cool feature I want to show you is the ability to select a component. In this case, we'll select some verts, and we'll go to Axis, Normal, and we will now be able to move them along their normal, which is very useful for scaling and growing and shrinking things. And if you do any kind of organic modeling, you'll find that you use this feature all the time. Okay, so you'll notice as I move this around, as I'm rotating it, it's rotating very freely. I can constrain it to the axis, but there's no kind of snapping involved really. So there's two ways to make that happen. One is to actually type in precise numbers in the channel box. The other way that I'm going to show you is if we hold down E on our keyboard and left click, we can turn on discrete rotate. And now you'll see that as we rotate, it rotates or kind of snaps to increments. I think the default in Maya is 5 degrees, but that can be changed in the settings. And if we turn it off, you see we can move freely again. And now switching this to local mode, you can see as we rotate it, the axis now corresponds to the object instead of the world. And you can see it snap back and forth. Hopefully that makes sense. And let's reset our object again, put it back at the origin. And I want to show you something similar to discrete rotate, but with scaling called snap scale. You can see as we scale now, it kind of snaps to mathematical increments. Hopefully that is pretty self-explanatory. But we can also achieve the same thing by going into the channel box and just typing in numbers, which I find I do more often. I think it's more precise. It's easier to get to. I would suggest you do that instead of turning on the snap scale. So the next thing I wanted to go over was soft selection. We got to this tool settings where I'm enabling the soft selection by double-clicking on the move icon. If you double-click on any of the translation icons, it'll open up the tool settings for that particular translation tool. And in this case, what I'm doing is I've selected the verts, And soft selection enables me to have kind of a fall off, so I can get more organic shapes going. So if you're looking to model rocks or leaves or anything kind of curvy, this will definitely help you get that done. You can see right now I'm adjusting the fall off radius to kind of give me different results. And there you have it, something really quickly that's kind of curvy and interesting looking, all done with soft selection. Also, keep in mind that soft selection doesn't just work with the move tool. You can also enable soft selection for rotation, for scaling. Let me show you how it works with rotation. Very similar. Grab some verts here. We'll double click on the rotate tool and we'll enable soft selection. And the same thing, it will rotate based on the fall off, and we can adjust that fall off to get different results if we want to have more of a tight fall off, or we can go to these curve presets also that have more steps and hills and valleys. And I encourage you to play around with this. You can get a lot of cool results. Again, it's really good for doing rocks and organic shapes. And if you couldn't tell, I'm having a blast right now just messing around with these different curve presets. You can also make your own preset or adjust the ones that are already in Maya. But for the most part, I find that just a linear soft selection is the best. So let's get out of this right now, get back to object mode. And lastly, here in this chapter, I want to talk about snapping and how that works with the translation tools. We already went over snapping for rotation and scaling, but now I want to show you snapping for just moving an object. Now if you click this little kind of magnet button at the top, you'll see that we snap to different grid points. And if I make my grid bigger or smaller, I can snap the pivot point of this object to the grid. Also, instead of activating this by hitting the shelf button up here, we can also snap to the grid by holding down X and then moving. So let's make a new plane here. Hold down X and then move it to the grid. And let's make this a little bit bigger. Now I want to show you how to take an object and snap it to a point. And this can be done by activating it up on the shelf or holding down V while you're moving. And that will snap the pivot point of that object to a point in space on another object. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn that off on the shelf. And now you can see we're moving around more freely until we hold down X to snap to the grid, or hold down V to snap to different points. And you will find you use this all the time when doing architectural modeling or anything that needs to be pretty exact. These are great tools for that. And that's about it for the basic Maya translation tools. While this is not probably the most glamorous part of building a 3D environment, this is still a foundation that we need to have to build things correctly. And with that, I think we can bring this chapter to a close and move on to some of Maya's modeling tools.